I think that before we can understand these kind of big questions of, why don't things work out the way I want, and why do bad things happen to good people? These are really huge questions, which obviously we can't, talk about and explain fully, in a few minutes. And it's something that in order for us to even begin to understand or begin to grasp, we have to have certain definitional fundamentals in place. So there are a few things I want to start with to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to these questions. The first is that the definition of good and bad. I think this is extremely important that we clarify what it means, because to each person, a good thing, one event might be considered good in someone's eyes and might be considered the worst thing ever in someone else's eyes. And so the definition of good and bad for me may not be the same as someone else. So now there's sort of a subjective understanding of what's a good thing and what's a bad thing. But I want to step back and actually look at the objective sort of capital good, capital G, and bad, capital B. That the khair and the opposite of khair, or something that is shar, as we would describe it in the Quran. So now when we talk about these sort of objective good and bad, that's completely different than the subjective. So the objective good and bad has a different definition than the subjective good and bad, where I think something is good for me, it may or may not be, and you might think it's good for me, or you may think it's bad for me, and it may or may not be. But the objective good and bad has a very, very specific definition. And that is this: anything that brings us closer to our objective, ultimate purpose is good for us, capital G. In other words, it is khair. Khair, the objective type of fundamental goodness. And anything that takes me away from my ultimate purpose, my ultimate objective, is going to be bad for me, or shar. Okay. Now the question is, what is my ultimate purpose? What is it that is my fundamental objective of existence? And that is also answered clearly in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the objective of our existence. This isn't just the objective of our time on this earth, but the objective of our existence, of our creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly defines, and you find that the illa here, what is the exception here? That we have not created jinn and human beings for any purpose except ubudiyya, except to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to know God, to love God, to devote ourselves and our lives to God. So when I say that my purpose is to enslave myself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what that means is that any event in my life, anything that I am given or anything that is taken. Now this is very deep, because sometimes I am brought closer to Allah, or I am brought closer to my purpose through what appears to be deprivation. So sometimes it is by Allah taking from me that I am actually brought closer to my purpose. But this on the outside appears to be something bad. For example, if we look at the example of Karun in the Quran. Now, Karun is a man who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed with money. He blessed him with so much money and so much, property. He had so much that he owned that it was actually difficult for many people to carry all of his wealth. This is how he was described in the Quran as being extremely wealthy. And he was given so much, and he used to walk among the people showing it off, right? almost like a red carpet type of moment, right? And then he had spectators, people looking at him and saying, oh, wow, look at what he has. We wish we had what he has. Kind of that ooh, ah type of thing that we see with, the celebrity worship type of culture. And so these people are looking at him and they're wishing they had what he had. And there was a second group of people. So Allah describes these people as those who sought this life, the people who desire the life of this world. And then there was a second group of people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave knowledge to. Those people looked at Karun and they saw through the glitter and they advised him to be grateful and to be humble. And his answer to them was إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي, that indeed I got all of this from a knowledge in me. He took credit for his gifts. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in the story and tells us what became of Karun, that actually Karun was destroyed. Allah tells us that he and his house were destroyed. And then we're told that after that, the people who wished that they had what he had were grateful that they were never given what he was given. So now when we examine this story, and Allah does not ever tell us stories just to entertain us. Allah tells us stories because they are lessons for us. When we examine the story, we recognize that sometimes when we get what we want, it isn't good for us. And in the case of Karun, he had what he wanted, right? He had wealth, he had all of these possessions, but was it actually good for him? In fact, getting what he wanted turned out to be the cause of his destruction because it actually ruined him. And for many people, this is what wealth, for example, does. But not just wealth, but sometimes it's in other gifts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala withholds in order to protect us. Sometimes Allah does not give us what we want because He knows that if He gave us what we wanted, it would ruin us. It would destroy us. And Allah knows best. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It might be that you hate something and it is good for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. And it might be that you love something and it is bad for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And Allah knows and you do not know. This is the essential concept we have to absorb, is that Allah knows and we do not know. Sometimes we very badly want something, but it is actually harmful for us. I want to just give an analogy to sort of explain this idea. Imagine a child. So imagine you have a 2-year-old and the 2-year-old sees you cutting with a knife, okay? And as everyone who's ever interacted with a toddler knows, they want to do everything that they see you do, right? So when the toddler sees you cutting with a knife, what does the toddler want? The toddler in that moment only wants one thing, and that is the knife. And that toddler, anyone who's dealt with children knows that when the toddler puts something in their mind that they want, it will be the end of the world unless you give it, right? So that toddler wants the knife. That toddler is determined to get the knife because the toddler thinks that this is what you're doing, and therefore the toddler wants the same. Maybe the toddler thinks that this is a toy. It's going to make him or her very happy. So the toddler has their eyes on the knife. Now, the question is this. If you give that toddler what he or she wants, what's going to happen to the child? And everyone knows that if you give a child a knife, no matter how badly they want it, all they're going to do is hurt themselves. All they're going to do is cut themselves. They can even kill themselves without knowing it. And this is what happens sometimes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We so badly want the knife. We so badly want that thing, whatever that thing is. Maybe it's being with a specific person, marrying a specific person, having a specific job, getting a specific position. Whatever it is that we so badly want, and everybody wants different things, right? But sometimes that thing that we want so badly is a knife. And it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows that it is a knife. Whereas from our perspective, we're just like that child. That's what I want. and that's what I want, right? And it's the heart wants what the heart wants. But for that child, the heart wants the knife. But that does not mean that it is good for the child. And so when we ask this question of why can't I get what I want, it's extremely important that we recognize that Allah knows and we don't know. There are times when we want things that will not be good for us. Now, on the other hand, and inshallah I want to wrap up, on the other hand, sometimes we really, really hate something. We really hate the way something is working out, or the way, a certain outcome that has come to happen, right? Has come to be, and we don't want it. And sometimes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that is good for us. Sometimes it is bitter medicine, but it is curing us. And right now we're having a lot of debate, for example, about this COVID vaccine, right? And without getting into any of this debate, let's just imagine that there was a cure for COVID. Forget about the vaccine for a second, but imagine that there was a cure, right? And the cure, it was 100% effective. It wasn't going to have any side effects, and it was going to cure you, right? Now, if a person is ill, but imagine that I tell you that in order to get that cure, you have to be pricked, you have to have a needle prick, right? So you're going to have to endure a certain limited amount of pain, right? But that needle is going to give you the cure to the sickness. So now the question is, what are you going to say? Well, as an adult who understands the full situation, you're going to look at that and say it's worth it, right? This is the cure. It's going to save my life. Yes, I'm going to endure a limited amount of pain, but that is medicine that's going to save my life, right? An adult can see that. But now imagine taking a child, no concept of what COVID is, no concept of what the cure is, no concept of what the medicine is, and now you try to convince that child to be to allow you to give them or to prick them with a needle, to give them that medicine. What is the child going to do? The child doesn't understand. So what's the response of the child? Anger, very, very, very sort of like aggressively pushing away the needle, right? But what the child doesn't understand is that they are also pushing away the cure. They are also pushing away medicine. And now this is exactly what sometimes happens to us in our lives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes gives us things in our lives, gives us situations in our lives, experiences in our lives, people. Sometimes the needle is a person in your life. But within that needle is a medicine. Within that needle is a cure. And that medicine and that cure actually is making us stronger. It is actually intended to save us. It is not intended to destroy us. So one could say that child never wanted the needle. The child never wanted the cure, but the cure saved the child. And sometimes you have to give it to the child, and it is your mercy and love for the child that will force that child to get the cure, even if the child doesn't want. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is high above any analogy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has more mercy for us than a mother does for her own child. And sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us needles in our lives. They come in different forms. They come in forms of things we don't like. Sometimes they come in the form of pain. Sometimes they come in the form of loss. Sometimes they come in the form of people that enter our lives, that become a trial for us. But within the needle of that situation is actually a cure to make us stronger and to actually allow us to overcome and to come out of that situation stronger and better than we were before. So it's really, if you take a step back, it's about looking at the entire experience and the situation from the lens of the adult who understands the full picture, rather than the lens of the child who only sees the pain. If we are able to step back and to look at the big picture of what is our ultimate purpose. And is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving us this situation to make us stronger and to help us and to save us, rather than looking at it as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala depriving us, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hurting us. And so it really has to do with changing our understanding of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and what our ultimate purpose in fact is. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم.